She's back. Kelly Ryerson is back on Healthcare Unfiltered. Kelly, welcome back to Healthcare Unfiltered.
Thank you for having me back on. I always like coming onto your show.
Yeah, and it means you haven't messed up yet, because once you mess up, we don't bring you back. Just be careful.
I've heard
Calculate
from
your
other
words.
people. You're pretty
Ca-
ruthless.
calculate your words carefully. So, Kelly, we're going to start a bit about you because obviously I've known you for a long time, but you really have this unique thing that you are in healthcare, immersed in healthcare and advocacy and so on, without a formal medical training. Your background is business and all of this, but tell us a bit about you and how did you become involved and entrenched in the world of pesticides and food and agriculture?
Yeah, so it's not something, as you say, like my background was business. I worked in finance for years and business strategy. Pesticides were nowhere on my radar whatsoever until one day had had my second child and found myself in a really bad state of chronic illness. And it was a vague chronic illness that was extremely debilitating. And every doctor I went to go and see had a different philosophy about what was causing my problems. But like the specific problems included rashes and just total exhaustion and losing hair and weird sinus issues. And so all these things and tingling in the hands and all these things seemed unrelated to one another. So you can imagine the way the medical system is set up. I would be sent to the neurologist and then to the dermatologist and into all these different specialists that never could really hone in on what was wrong with me. In fact, it got to the point where I was told that maybe I was a hypochondriac and maybe, in fact, one endocrinologist told me that maybe what I really needed was to spend less time with my kids and get a job outside of the home because that was what was causing my problems. So I didn't take to that very well because I knew that's not what was happening. But I did finally go see a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist had intake blood work for me. And he had intake blood work that for the very first time anyone had even thought to test what my vitamin levels. So my vitamin levels come back and they are abysmal. I mean, abysmal. I had a D of, I believe it was one. I had hardly any B12. I had zero vitamin C. So really that cat is, you could say that I had scurvy given all the rashes and everything. So I had severe malnutrition. And digging into it, I thought, well, maybe I have celiac disease. No, I did not have celiac disease. And so I was disappointed because I thought that was the diagnosis it was going to be. And along the way, a doctor told me I think you should try giving up gluten because I think it's really inflammatory for some people. And a lot of people are able to reverse their chronic illnesses and autoimmunity, which is sort of what this was presenting as, by doing so. And so I gave up gluten and I started eating really cleanly and I got much, much better. It was like a really rapid turnaround from that point on. And I went to Columbia University to a conference there on celiac and gluten sensitivity and this rise of non-celiac gluten sensitivity and what's behind it. And some doctors where they were standing in front and they were saying, well, we just don't know. It might not even be the gluten. And so then I started thinking, I was thinking about the farm. Now I'm from suburban San Francisco and I thought I've never really spent time on a farm. I don't know about farming. I asked, is anything sprayed on our grain or something to do with the wheat? And people said, no, nothing's sprayed. It wouldn't be that. Well, then someone from General Mills came and found me at the conference and said, yeah, actually Roundup, the weed killer, is sprayed on our grain just before harvest it's to facilitate an easier
Who told you
harvest.
that? Like a farmer, random farmer told you that?
This was an employee from General Mills. He was a scientist from General Mills. And actually he was at the conference because
So this was
he
like a random thing, like you met the scientist at the conference and he just said that.
yeah, well, he kind of found me in a corner, which was weird because he didn't speak up when I asked in front of the whole group. And so it's like, well, what is this secret pulling me aside? So it led me down this big path of understanding how our farming practices really are dramatically impacting human health. And, these are ingredients that are not listed on labels, and the practices are really not clear. And a lot of the science that revolves around pesticide use is either just industry provided and sometimes in some cases false, and or the EPA is just overlooking some obvious problems with the pesticides. Glyphosate is the most used pesticide of all time. And I became involved. This
You
is
mean
how I,
Roundup because glyphosate is the chemical ingredient, right? Or are you talking glyphosate? Like just, I want to make sure listeners understand the difference between Roundup and glyphosate, I guess.
yeah, so glyphosate itself, because there are a lot of different formulations of glyphosate. They're glyphosate-based herbicides, and Roundup is the most famous of them and the most sold commercially. So, but glyphosate is the actual active, well, they say it's the active ingredient, but actually the formula is pretty toxic too. Anyway, so that is how I got to know you during the Monsanto cancer Roundup cancer trials. And while I didn't come to the story of glyphosate because of cancer, it was because of all of these other effects that glyphosate has on the human body. It was very eye-opening to see the corruption behind the chemical.
So let's talk about glyphosate a little bit, just to understand how commonly it's used. You talk about glyphosate-based herbicides and formulations, obviously. Um, so give us a sense of what we're talking about, whether it is US based, worldwide. Tell us a bit of this, just to understand how big this is.
Yeah, so it was originally developed by Monsanto and it was first used in the United States, originally as a metal pipe cleaner because of its ability to bind to minerals. But then Monsanto realized, wow, this has some really significant herbicide properties, and they started using it on landscapes in the mid 70s. They started using it on landscapes and in agriculture. It was used a lot, but there were other, actually in some ways more toxic herbicides that were used at the time. So when glyphosate came out and it was considered to be a non-toxic herbicide, that there was great celebration and wide adoption of this chemical because they're like, great, this is such a safer option. And to some extent, that was true because they didn't know yet all the science that we know today about it. So in terms of like replacing something like DDT or atrazine, which unfortunately is still used, it was a good thing. It then spread to be used globally. So it is really used around the globe. Some countries have tried to ban it and it's been unsuccessful in banning it, which is very frustrating because a lot of that has to do just with the geopolitical part of it, where these companies make sure that their products are supported even if a country isn't interested. For example, Germany was very excited because they had a ban going on glyphosate, which is amazing because Bayer, which owns this product, is a German company. The Germans and Austrians didn't want it sprayed. And then the EU Parliament came in and said, oh no, you actually can't ban it because the EU doesn't want to ban it. So there have been all these little pockets of attempts to not have it sprayed anymore, but they seem to always fail.
Okay. How often is it used to spray? Is there any other things that people use? Is that the only um, herbicide that's being actually sprayed? That's one first question. On number two, what happened when the genetically modification that took place and allowed the Roundup to be actually sprayed also on crops? When did this happen, and what was the impact of that?
So that's when you see, if you look at there are these, because I'm obsessed with glyphosate, there are these maps online, and you can see how the government has documented the change in the use of glyphosate over the years. And you see in the mid 90s this sudden explosion of use, particularly in the middle of the United States in our breadbasket. And you look at that, you think, what on earth happened at that time? And what happened is it was the introduction of the genetically modified seeds, so the corn, soy, cotton. And these seeds were developed in order to be resistant to the effects of glyphosate. And so you could go and plant these seeds. They'll grow. If there are weeds that are growing around the crops that are undesirable and they'll fight for the nutrition from the soil, it's no problem. You just do a spray on the entire field and the crop stays alive, but the weeds die. So this seemed like a masterful, brilliant development without thinking of some of the long-term effects of what this might entail. And glyphosate is definitely not the only herbicide that's sprayed is just the most commonly used, but actually super weeds have now developed. And so it actually isn't nearly as effective as it was before it was originally used. So now these GMOs that used to just be Roundup ready, so it was only resistant to the effects of glyphosate. Now you have 5 different herbicides that they're resistant to. So you can put together this whole chemical concoction and spray all of it on top of these GMOs because they just need that much more power. And I love watching this because it's fascinating to see how nature can, out evolve these poisons that we're putting on it. It's actually kind of a beautiful thing, even though I know that it's a nightmare for the farmers.
But what you're saying is that because you have these genetically modified seeds, the farmers are able to spray on the crops and they're not going to damage the harvest.
Exactly.
So
That's a
that
great
that's
business
really
plan.
yeah, that's really led to the explosion of the use of Roundup. But what you're saying is there are additional pesticides that also will not damage the soil and the crops beyond Roundup.
Well, they definitely damage the soil, but they don't damage the crops.
Don't damage the crops. So that's probably obviously led the farmers to use it way more commonly, more often. And in fairness, I mean, Roundup is a good weed killer.
Oh, it is.
I mean, it does
That's
a good
what's
job.
sad. I'm sure that people, listeners that go to Home Depot and they buy that when they're getting their garden ready for the spring, like how amazing is that to just spray and have those pesky weeds disappear?
Right.
Like that's a great thing. And so it's understandable why it's been so popular.
Which is obviously leads to a push from even farmers. They're like, no, we like it because it's doing the job right. So you'll get a lot of people who don't want to really not use it in a sense.
Exactly. And, if you have the EPA telling you this is perfectly safe, then you really want to
Yeah.
believe that, which is actually where I came from. I don't know if you came from this idea, but when I approached this, I didn't think it was possible that the EPA hadn't done a thorough job evaluating the toxicity of this product because I think I had just a massive trust in
Yeah.
government,
Yeah.
which has changed.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit through your efforts. But let me just ask you a quick question, and then we'll get into some of the legal issues being ongoing. But is Roundup that is being used in the US similar to the Roundup used in Mexico, in Canada, in Germany, in Europe? Um, are the formulations different? And the reason I ask, Kelly, is because there's a lot of folks who will say that in the US, there are certain diseases that are occurring that are a bit different than what you're seeing outside of the US. And is it possible that some of these are because the formulations that are used in the US are somewhat different than the ones outside of the US?
Yes. So it's so insanely frustrating. And this is true not just of the Roundup formulation, but of so many different products that we sell in the United States versus globally. Our standards are considerably lower in terms of safety than, say, Europe. We'll use that as a comparison point. So in the case of Roundup, the formulation that we get has a very toxic surfactant, which is the soapy substance that goes along with the glyphosate that allows for the delivery of the glyphosate to the target weed. So the formulation has this POEA surfactant that is a surfactant that is banned actually in Europe. It's banned because of its massive toxicity. And so there are a lot of scientists that argue this point that is it even really the glyphosate? Is it the POEA? Is it the combination, which probably is the combination is where I fall. But you can see that the manufacturers can go to create these other highly effective formulations and sell them everywhere else around the world and just leave us with this most toxic
But
version.
but but it's banned in Europe. Why did Europe ban it and we didn't ban it? I don't understand.
Yeah, we have much, much lower hurdles to jump over. They in Europe they subscribe to the precautionary principle where it's not a well let's wait and see what happens. Let's spray this and see what happens. It's more upfront evaluation and let's take the precaution in the beginning and not poison people afterwards. So they're
Yeah.
much, much more cautious about what chemicals they allow out on the market. But actually, and I want to make a side note too, the formulation right now that you go and you buy in from Bayer, that you go and buy in Home Depot is actually a new formulation and they have taken the glyphosate out of that formulation because of the lawsuits. But the problem is studies were done, and actually the new formulation is 40 times more toxic than the glyphosate version.
Oh
So
gosh.
absolutely no one should, even more than ever, should not be buying the Roundup product and spraying it.
Okay. We're taping this at the end of March, beginning of April, and just about a week ago or so, there was a huge verdict that came out against Monsanto with, it's about $2 billion plus when they lost a lawsuit from a patient that alleged and won that the lymphoma was caused by Roundup. Um, Obviously, my listeners and viewers know that I was involved in the first litigation trials, and I wrote the book on this toxic exposure. I don't know how closely you followed this latest lawsuit, but you have concerns about where the where the legal thing is going with the pesticides in general and maybe Roundup in particular. What do you know about this recent verdict that came out? If you're able to maybe elaborate on it, if you've been following, I mean, I don't know. And then, are there any implications of that moving forward, positively or negatively?
Yeah, I actually, because I covered in depth the first three trials, I didn't follow in depth this trial, but I do know it's been several years since there has been just a gangbuster, enormous headline winning verdict. And this one was over $2.1 billion. So just an enormous, enormous verdict for the plaintiff. And I think that that really shows the tone that a lot of the evidence that was shown in the first three trials still stands true today, that Monsanto didn't warn the customers that there's a chance that they could get cancer from exposure. And this failure to warn idea is one that has really been the driving force behind a lot of this litigation, because the lawyers are able to prove, plaintiff lawyers are able to prove that Monsanto had reason to think that glyphosate could cause cancer. It's actually a similar case right now with the chemical paraquat, and that is made by ChemChina, and it is tightly tied to Parkinson's disease. And actually, so much so that China banned the use of paraquat, but they're selling it here because we're happy to have it. So there's litigation going on with that as well. What is just wild is that this verdict happened in Georgia, because something much greater is even happening than this verdict. With all of these settlements, which now you probably know the number maybe more than me, I think it was a $12 billion settlement that Bayer has been having to pay out to tons and tons of people that never even saw the courtroom. So they just are settling these cases because they think that there's a chance that they might lose in court. They see no end to this litigation because they are unwilling to admit, even though actually there was even a lawsuit against the EPA, there have been all these lawsuits against Bayer, they are unwilling to admit that this might cause cancer. So this is going to bankrupt them the current way, because people will continue using it, they'll continue getting cancer, they're not warned. The only way for them to put a stop to these payouts is to make it so that we can't sue them. So Bayer proposed this a couple of years ago, and they said, this is a part of a way that we are going to settle this litigation once and for all. We're just going to take the right away for them to sue. This is really great. And I thought that that was such an ambitious goal that was completely nonsensical, because how could you pass enough legislation in this country to make it so that people's rights are totally stripped? It just did not seem feasible to me. So over the last 2 years, Bayer has met with various congresspeople and senators in DC, and they were trying to slide a pesticide liability shield into the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill comes out every 5 years. It's a massive, massive document, very important for our farming system. And they hid it on page 798. So it was just a tiny little section, just a few sentences. Oh yeah, and you're not going to be able to sue if the EPA says this doesn't cause cancer. You can't sue.
So if just to clarify, what they want to pass is if the EPA says this is safe, then it's safe, and no one can contest that, period.
That is the bottom line. Yes.
Wow.
So if you trust in the EPA and you think that they do a thorough job, then you're probably okay with it. If you don't, then that's going to be a problem because the EPA bases all their evaluation only on industry provided research. And so they weren't able to pass the farm bill yet just because of, actually not because of that, but just because of lots of politics and political change. What they did think that they could do is they formed something called the Modern Ag Alliance, and it is a very, very flashy organization, a PR front for the agricultural chemical industry. They've gone into 20 states and they put up billboards talking about how farmers deserve to use Roundup, that glyphosate is, the farmer's best friend, all of these things saying how it's going to be horrible if no longer glyphosate will be sold. And they're acting like this is a pro-farmer act, but it is actually very anti-farmer. They've gone into each of these states and they've met with enough legislators and likely paid off, though I don't have proof, enough legislators are put enough pressure that they are now actively passing these bills state by state to stripping the rights away. So while this federal one for a whole nationwide issue is still kind of baking, they are actively moving state by state. And what's wild is the first one to go right now is Georgia. So Georgia had this bill. They have their Senate and their Congress passed it. Now it's sitting on the desk of Governor Kemp in Georgia. He ultimately will have the decision if he is going to veto this bill and say, no, I want Georgians to have the right to sue, or if he's going to approve it and then basically permanently steal our rights away.
So let's play both scenarios. Let's say he approves it, which means that the folks who live in Georgia, not outside of Georgia, cannot sue Monsanto or other companies, or is it just specific for Monsanto?
It's all pesticide manufacturers.
So like they cannot sue the paraquat manufacturer.
Yeah, they can't do ChemChina. Yeah,
They cannot do any manufacturer who's doing specifically pesticides.
that's right.
So if he approves it, can this be appealed after the governor? I mean, you're not a lawyer, obviously, but you know enough about law to be dangerous in a conversation. So, I mean, is this appealable?
There could be lawsuits, but I think that it would be impossible to overturn. And part of the problem is that Governor Kemp actually ran on a campaign where he wants to curtail the excess of mass tort law and liability. And so this is like right up his alley to take away the right of these lawyers.
Do you think that the recent verdict of more than $2 billion in favor of the plaintiff would make him pause?
Well, that's the hope. So there have been a lot. So the good news is that thousands of people have on the ground been motivated and they are pushing. And we flooded his phone lines with exactly this information and with
Well,
this,
but
which I'm
he's
sure
been
he's
flooded
heard.
with the other side too. Come on.
Oh yeah, well, and they probably give better treats than our side.
Right. So I'm just saying, like, yes, you did, but obviously both sides are flooding his phone lines.
They are both flooding. And like this next week, so the next ones up are Iowa, Tennessee, and Florida. So those are very active. I mean, the amount of money that the chemical companies are spending on this situation right now has to be through the roof because they're hitting 20 states at once.
So, as an advocate, I mean, you've been on the Hill many times, and you've dedicated, I would say, I mean, since I've known you, the past 7 years really of your life trying to do this. Number one, I'm not going to ask you the silly question, how this makes you feel. I think it's a stupid question to ask. But what can you actually do? I mean, yes, you can call all of these lines, but I kind of feel this is like no longer under, like it's not in your control or even in the control of the lawyers because you're just waiting on a signature, yay or nay from the governor.
Yeah. So the only thing really that we have left, because this is I don't need to make don't mean to make light of this. This is fully catastrophic in terms of our ability to deal with the pesticide companies. Like this is the worst thing that could happen to American citizens in terms of pesticide exposure because now
We've never had, have we ever had any precedent in America where a citizen cannot sue anybody?
yes. So what we have is this is what has happened with vaccines. So vaccines got a liability shield exactly like this, and around that time, there were people that were speaking up. This will steal the right of the consumer, but also it will allow manufacturers to be even more reckless with what they're doing is the problem.
Of
Because
course.
if you're not going to be sued, why would you make sure your product
Yeah.
was safe?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're just become not necessarily careless. You just don't need to spend more time on safety. I mean, that's the so what are the chances? Like if you were a betting woman, what would be your chance? What would you think the chances of the governor passing this versus not?
Well, I am feeling, I don't know, it changes day to day. We're going to try and have a rally, but people don't really have insight into his ear. Although I put out like all these requests. Like, does anyone know Governor Kemp very well? And actually, some people do who reached back. And it's like, can we get to him on a personal level to not have this happen? We've had motivated farmers to talk to him too, so that he understands. Because the problem is, think about how long this took even for me to describe the situation right now. Most people don't have that attention span to understand. And so they're just taking the word of whoever's the easiest person delivering it, which is what the lobbyists are providing.
So obviously we have a new administration and we have a new secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services with RFK Jr. And it's fair to say he does have some controversial views and controversial opinions. I know that me and you disagree on some of these opinions, but we do agree on a lot of the things that he actually come on, specifically on agriculture and food safety and things of that nature. So do you think he has any influence over this? Like, I mean, Bobby Kennedy have done a lot of work with Monsanto on pesticides, on agriculture and so on. And in his new role, is he able to influence the direction of this?
So I think that if there ever was a time that we might be able to make change there at the government, at the federal level, it is right now. Because Bobby Kennedy was one of the attorneys that fought glyphosate, and he was in the courtroom with both of us. He is very well aware of the toxicities. He spent his whole life fighting against these poisons and pesticides. He was really inspired by Silent Spring by Rachel Carson as a little boy. And so from that point forward, he really has had his eye on it. Now, he's not head of the EPA. The person that's head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, we don't know yet where he's going to fall on these things. A lot of the appointees have been Make America Healthy Again types of leaders, but it's kind of yet to be seen. And I think the bottom line is going to be if the EPA continues to control human exposure to pesticides, we may not see any change that is going to help us. And I actually think it's going to completely steal our ability to reproduce in this country because the endocrine disruption is just beyond. I mean, that can be a different podcast because it's just shocking.
So Bobby Kennedy cannot influence the governor, correct? I mean, he doesn't have any
Well, I mean, he could
jurisdiction.
call him. He could call him, but he can't influence him. And actually, even Trump can't really influence him because I asked. um,
Right.
they can make phone calls, but Governor Kemp is known to sort of be his own guy, and in some ways that might actually backfire. Um,
Mhm.
but one thing, so then you start looking at policy, you're like, can we get tricky here and try and just change the line of responsibility? And so one of these aspects is called FIFRA, and FIFRA is the legislation that effectively puts pesticide regulation under the EPA. Is there a way to move FIFRA under HHS, under RFK Jr., so that human health is taken into consideration? You could leave the environmental part maybe at the EPA, but really where it should be sitting is what is the impact on human health. So if that becomes in RFK Jr.'s purview, I think that it will be game changing. I think that the overall federal liability shield would never happen. And I'm hopeful for that. But what's scary is I feel like this movement is fully dependent on one man, RFK Jr., to actually have happen. Without him, I, so many people have tried for years and years and years and years to fight this situation to no good result, including some senators and Congress people have put up great bills, but nothing has really ever happened.
When do we expect to know what's going to happen on the Georgia level and what's the next state? Like when is this, like tomorrow, next week, next month, or is it completely up in the air?
I think it's completely up in the air, but it has to be by the end. I'm thinking he gets 60 days, I believe, but don't hold me to that. But I'm thinking it's something like that.
Okay.
There's some amount of time that the governor has to either sign. And you know what else is, if he doesn't do anything, it becomes law. So
But
he
but
cannot.
but again, neither of us is a lawyer, but isn't it like, isn't there, or I mean, I presume somebody could sue the state of Georgia and goes to Supreme Court. No, I mean, there's
Yeah,
must be a way.
someone could
Now,
sue that.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
the Supreme Court may say, well, no, you lose, or we're not
yeah,
going to
that
hear it, but I'm presumed like there's a way of at least contesting it or something.
yeah. There is always a way to sue. It's just like I wonder how effective that would be,
Right, right.
particularly as you have so many different states. Are you going to sue each
So
state? I
what
mean,
are the other states? I mean, I don't think you need to list them, but I mean, these are like
North
agricultural
Dakota,
states.
Montana, Iowa, Illinois, um, Florida, Texas, Kansas. I think Arkansas is in there.
Well, it's eventually it's going to be all every
Georgia,
state,
Alabama.
right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it
eventually it
is.
would be all over the state.
Yeah.
So, how does this make you feel? I mean, you're an advocate. You've been on the Hill. You've done really your hardest. I mean, I know you feel disappointed, but I mean, do you like what? Like throw the white towel and say, screw this. I mean, I'm done. I mean, I've done everything I can.
Well, it's so funny because what's happening also is this MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again. It is, I know a lot of the people that are running it. I know a lot of the influencers that are in it. And what happened is that when RFK Jr. went and he endorsed Trump, there was a big chasm that grew in this clean food movement. And you suddenly had these, lifelong Democrats that could never imagine voting for a Republican um, at any cost. You had a bunch of people that were historically Democrats and independents that then went and voted for Trump just to get RFK Jr. in there to be taking care of these toxicities. So what's very frustrating for me to see within this anti-pesticide movement and the clean food movement is that the second that there was any straying from the mainstream that Democrats are the ones that are going to help our food system, Republicans are bad. As soon as that kind of started happening, it's frustrating because even right now with this liability shield issue, it should be very bipartisan and it's not feeling like it simply because we have Trump and RFK Jr. in office. And all of this started well before Trump. I mean, this has been in the works for years, so
Right.
it's not partisan. And I think that that is really the biggest problem that we have right now in trying to fight back against this. But I will say that I am not throwing in the towel yet because this whole path out of all of this pesticide use in our food is in something called regenerative agriculture. And it is a much, much more profitable way for farmers to farm. It's not necessary, it can be, but it's not necessarily certified organic. But it's a way of healing the soil from all of this chemical damage and really growing things the way we used to grow them. And when you do that and you stop spraying things, you find these ecosystems return. You find they don't have to be spending so much money on pesticides because the pests simply are decreasing. And the actual crops that are grown are considerably more nutrient dense and healthy and taste better in the whole business. And as soon as the farmers that are these big row crop farmers that right now are the corn and soy farmers that we know that are growing these GMO seeds and crops, once they see that they can make more money by changing their practices, healing their soil, stopping the GMO system, it's going to be game over for chemical agriculture. Because the bottom line is people want to be able to make money. They don't want to get sick themselves, as sprayers in their communities and their families. So that is now where I have my sights set because what I've found is this battle, like going fist to fist against like the EPA, is really ineffective. So now we just need a big systemic.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of these book events when I wrote my book Toxic Exposure, and the two most common questions I get asked is number one, well, we understand it's a problem, but tell me what to do. I mean, you're telling me that glyphosate is in crops, in cereal, in food, in bread, and all of this. And I'm not really sure going organic is going to help much because there's a lot of pesticides also when, in organic food. So that's the first common one. Number two, actually, it's interesting when you talk to people who have used Roundup, they sometimes tell me, Well, it actually works. Can you give me an alternative? I mean, I'll dump it. I won't use Roundup. I just give me an alternative to Roundup that works as good, and I promise you I'll never use it again. So let's start with the second question. What are the alternatives? Because I think if you provide people with alternatives, then I think it's an easier sell if they have an alternative. That's one. And number two, I think it's rather important to that alternative is not just for weed killers. It's just, in food and things like that, not everybody can afford organic food, and even organic food is not always as clean as someone might suggest.
Absolutely. The good news is there is so much ag tech innovation around decreasing pesticide use. It's just which of these things that are coming up through the private sector are going to be the most effective, most user-friendly, and really be adopted in a large scale. Farmers don't have extra cash sitting around to be investing in a lot of fancy new tech or something for this issue. They're not wealthy. They actually a lot of times have jobs off the farm because the farm itself is not profitable, even these large farms. So one idea and one very actually well-developed product, I guess if you call it a product, is a technology, is these fleets of robots that are being developed by a guy named Clint Brower at Green Robots. And it's amazing because it like goes, these little robots go up and down the different rows and they kill without using chemicals the weeds that are growing in between. So it eliminates that. And actually, he was inspired to build this robot fleet because he actually lost his dad to cancer because of exposure. So he moved back from LA to his farm in Kansas to build this out. There's that. There are now some chemical replacements that are coming out. There's one called Firehawk that has come out of Australia. And this one is very interesting because it's not only going to be for the farm, but also landscapes. So this chemical is often sprayed in schools, parks, but really all over a lot of cities. Is glyphosate is sprayed. And so if you can give cities and schools an alternative that's non-toxic, they're going to want it. So it was really hard it took a while to get the price to a place that the alternative that would be cost effective, and they've been able to do it. And it finally was just recently approved by the EPA for use in this country. And I think that you're going to be seeing a lot of that product. And it is a non-toxic product that is acetic acid based.
Okay, so that's a good, and you think that will have a positive impact then on the food by
I
default,
think a really big positive impact.
right?
And this is another thing to note too. There is this generational shift right now on the farm that's really interesting. So the average age of a farmer is 57 in this country, and a lot are older. And oftentimes you'll have there probably are cases of the daughter, but I hear about, the farmer and his son comes onto the farm and he wants to take over the family farm. Oftentimes that son is really excited to do some cleaner practices and start changing this traditional, pivoting away from this chemical agriculture model. Oftentimes that dad, or in sometimes case the grandpa, it's really a hard emotional shift to think that the way they've been doing things is not correct. And so it's really getting over that hurdle. But from what I hear, it's this next generation of farmers that are coming up that are super excited to go and see the alternatives like the robots, the ag tech, the regenerative farming, and these other ways of doing it. But the question is, can we last as a species here and not continue to get poisoned over the 20 years of what
Yeah,
that land transition is?
yeah. My last question to you, Kelly, is just going back until then, until you get that alternative that have an impact. What advice do you give people who are listening or watching regarding food consumption? I know you cut gluten and you're feeling healthy and so on, but maybe, again, people can do gluten free, but other than that, I mean, you've got cereal, milk, bread, I mean, things that people, what advice or what changes have you made further in your food consumption until these alternatives kick in?
Yeah, there's so many different things that you can do. And you're right saying that organic isn't necessarily going to be the winning thing because they use their own pesticides actually that are considered non-toxic, but it's still not great to be eating pesticides, right? But Still, I would say, even with that question mark around organic, eating organically is just very, very important, especially with products that are grains that would be sprayed pre-harvest. So grains, also chickpeas, hummus, those are some foods that really need to be organic, or you actually shouldn't eat them because they tend to be very, very high in glyphosate. So those are just two things to look at first. Another thing, just because it's on my mind before I get back to food, is for the women using personal products, glyphosate is found in tampons and pads and actually in some baby diapers. So making sure that you now purchase personal products that are organic cotton based is really important because you can imagine what the absorption like is in those areas. So those are some things that you definitely can do. I have a great water filter because it is found in our drinking water, and often some municipalities don't even test for it. So I have a water filter underneath my sink. It's called Clearly Filtered. It not only takes out glyphosate, but also another really toxic one that really is a hormone disruptor called atrazine. And so I feel good about that. And I cook my pasta in that water and, anything that I'm drinking or baking with.
How about bottled water? Like, is that not good enough?
It's not good enough. It's not good enough because you don't know, and sometimes when I'm traveling, I'll get a glass bottle of mountain spring water, and it's in a green glass bottle, and you see it a lot of places. And the thing is, though, I don't know because glyphosate is found in the rain and it's really everywhere. And so in that fancy glass bottle, what am I actually getting? I'm not totally sure. So really a filter is the best way you can go to avoid it.
For those who are listening, I mean, there's a reason why Kelly Ryerson is called Glyphosate Girl. You have a website, right? What's your website?
Yes, glyphosatefacts.com. You can come, you can learn much more. And I have links to tons of independent peer-reviewed research in case you're saying Kelly's full of it. You can go and see that I'm not. Scientists have come to these conclusions themselves. And then you can follow me on Instagram as Glyphosate Girl.
Yeah, I mean, you do a lot of really very important videos to educate the masses on this. Well, Kelly, I can't thank you enough. This is really exciting, interesting, and concerning, I would say. So we probably will have to stay tuned and figure out where this is going to lead. And all eyes are on Georgia, especially after this verdict. But now all of the eyes are on Governor Kemp, huh?
That's right. This will be entertaining.
Yeah. Kelly Ryerson, Glyphosate Girl on Healthcare Unfiltered. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.